So it's my honor now to introduce our speaker for the evening, Eric Fischl, who joins us from Sag Harbor, New York, where he lives and works with his artist wife, April Gornik. Fischl received a BFA from the California Institute of Arts in 1972 and is a fellow at both the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the American Academy of Arts and Science. His career spans more than 40 years and encompasses a wide variety of media, from painting and printmaking to sculpture. His work is frequently recognized for its narrative tension, moral ambiguity, and psychological intimacy. Born in New York City and raised in Long Island, Fischl burst onto the New York art scene in the late 1970s and was among an international cohort of artists who contributed to the renaissance of figurative painting over the ensuing decade. Fischl's paintings of this period were among the first to address American suburbia as a serious subject. His larger-than-life canvases dissect the banal materialism of American life and the undercurrent of insecurity and sexual anxiety that lurks behind the familiar facades of suburban America. In recent years, Fischl has become increasingly interested in portraiture, painting images of friends, relatives, and others who he admires. He's particularly drawn to family portraits in which the complex dynamic between parents, siblings, and the artist himself provide as much intrigue as his early narrative paintings. Fischl's 2005 painting, The Clemente Family, is an excellent case in point. This mysterious portrait of fellow artist Francesco Clemente and his family hangs, it pulsates with psychological drama, and it is currently on view in our third-floor gallery, a recent gift to the museum from a board member. Also on view in our contemporary galleries is Fischl's evocative sculpture, 10 Breaths, Tumbling Woman, a scaled-down version of a piece he made in response to the tragic events of 9/11. It's a stirring sculpture, which I hope all of you have had an opportunity to view, and I think we'll hear more about in just a moment. Eric Fischl's work is represented in major museum collections throughout the world and has been shown in countless national and international exhibitions. This fall, Fischl is opening a solo exhibition in London of new paintings, as well as curating a group exhibition at the Flag Art Foundation in New York City. As many of you here know, in 2012, he published a fascinating autobiography titled Bad Boy, My Life on and Off the Canvas. And now it's a pleasure to welcome Eric Fischl.
Thank you, Joan. Is there water up there by any chance? Did you see? I'm not going to get through it if there's not. Is there any water? Oh, thank you. Now I'm okay. I was worried. Thank you, Joanna, for that introduction. And thank you. I don't know why I put that on. When I take it off, I'm going to drink it. Anyway, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be a part of this great collection at the museum, and completely honored by that. And I would also like to thank Clarice Smith, the artist Clarice Smith, for being such an incredible benefactor to the arts and doing this program. It's great. I'd also like to thank Nona Martin for bringing me here and dragging me around for the last 2 days, making me talk to everybody and working me like a dog. Let's see if this works. I'm going the wrong, okay. So there's like a zillion ways to talk about artwork, my artwork, any artist's artwork. Different approaches that are, anyway, I've talked about it a lot of different ways, but what I thought I would do today is start with something that you're wouldn't know anything about my work, which is this painting here, which was done in my second year of art school. And I show it to you because it was a painting that changed my life in a way, although after it was done, it took me several years to realize that. And so I want to introduce this as a way of talking about process, about creativity, and the sort of mystery that is a part of the creative process. I was working on this painting, which didn't look anything like this painting while I was working on it. And I was working on it for a very long period of time. As I said, I'm like in my second year of art school at Arizona State University, trying to figure out what painting is, what I'm trying to accomplish, etc., not having much skill at any of it. And I'm painting away, and I'm painting away. And my influences are people like Kandinsky and as well as some pop artists, and I'm trying to sort of put these things together, and I'm coming up with something that is just idiotic, and I'm getting more and more frustrated to the point where at one point I erupted, and I threw my paintbrushes at the canvas, and I took turpentine and I threw the turpentine on it and sat there watching the paint sort of run off and stuff like that. And I went through this whole temper tantrum around it. And then as I began to calm down, I walked back up to the canvas and I painted that white thing. And somehow something made sense that I could then go ahead in a very calm, clear state and finish the painting, paint the rest of the painting. And this painting is an anachronism for me. It was something that first of all, I couldn't explain it. It was like if somebody says, well, what does it mean or whatever, I have zero idea. But the experience of coming to a place where this momentous cathartic moment occurred that produced a complete mystery that then became ultimately the muse in which I followed the rest of my career today on. And part of it has to do with that it's a shape that's evocative to me of two things. One, it's evocative of a house, a very simplistic sort of isometric house. And the other, it's evocative of a bed, a mattress, something like that. And years later, when I began to explore figuration, I moved into places within the house that create this psychological narratives that have become my work and what I'm known for. A lot of it centers around the bedroom, around the bed as an arena. And what I thought I would do tonight is sort of show you, without going chronologically, jump around, because I think that's more interesting visually, just show you a bunch of paintings that I did that use the bed as an arena, and talk about that. The one thing I would like to say about this painting is that there's this moment, which is a complicated moment. You don't know exactly what is going on here. You don't know. It's called master bedroom. And you don't know whether this is a child that's in her parents' room kind of thing, sort of playing around, or whether there's something that's really not supposed to be happening that's happening in this room. And there are a few clues that sort of steer you into other associations, one of which is that next to the bed by the phone is an ashtray with a cigarette in it. And, again, the question, is that her cigarette? Is she, smoking, is she young enough and trying smoking out and being a bad girl in her parents' room? Or is she, is there somebody else who's older that smokes in that room? The other thing is that she's looking off to the side and she's looking off in the direction that the light comes in. And so that implies that there may be somebody outside the picture frame that, could be in the bathroom, could be coming into the room, etc. And these are all sort of signals that I use to kind of establish, not a specific narrative, but to a set of keys that move you into associations that take a narrative this way or that way. And that's a technique that I've employed throughout my career. I mean, here's another example of a painting in which a woman, it's a very dark painting and darker still by the slide, but sitting on the edge of a bed contemplating something, that gesture creeps me out. It's like she's looking at her wrist because she's going to slit them or what, but there's a kind of, she's having certainly a reflective moment about something. And in the background is a sharp light coming from another room and a book with these glasses on it. Clearly they're not her glasses. This painting was suggested to me by an art dealer friend who wanted me to do a painting that entered into a dialogue with two Edward Hopper paintings. Edward Hopper did these paintings 10 years apart. One was called Summertime or Summer in the City, and the other one is called something into philosophy, Journey into Philosophy, or something along those lines. I'm sorry, I'm blanking it now. The one painting was a woman sitting on the edge of the bed, behind her a naked man sleeping. And 10 years later, he paints a man sitting on the edge of the bed with a naked woman sleeping behind him. Anyway, so a couple of years after suggesting that I might enter into a dialogue with that, this was the painting that came out of it. It's called The Philosopher's Chair. And one of the things that came out of it and produced actually a whole series of work for me was the presence that this chair has. The great thing about painting is that you can animate anything in the painting, make it feel like it's the witness. And in this case, the chair feels very much like it's the witness that's somehow negotiating this transaction between this older man and this apparently younger woman. And again, you don't know what the cause of this dynamic is, whether it's a paid-for kind of event or a relationship or, whatever, whether it's before or after sex. But it's certainly about that. Anyway, you'll see throughout the slides that this chair shows up a lot. And I did a whole series of paintings called The Bed, the Chair, and then some qualifier to it. It was the first time I'd used the chair as the chair and the bed as a constant, and then just sent different people through the same room. It started with this, which isn't about the bed and the chair, but is about sort of taking a room like a motel room and putting people in that room that either coincidentally do or don't have something to do with each other. In this case, you have this scene which are dramatically contrasted. This is a diptych, a small diptych. But you know, you don't know whether it's the same hotel room motel room at different times, or whether it's just the two rooms near each other or whatever in the same strip of rooms at a motel. But clearly there are two very different things going on physically and emotionally and psychologically in those spaces. Again, the bed is an arena. This was a series I did that was for a museum in Krefeld, Germany, and it's a museum. The museum owns these Mies van der Rohe houses, his first modernist residences. They now use it for exhibition spaces, and they ask artists who they're showing if they would enter into a dialogue with the building or the history or et cetera, et cetera. And so when they asked me, I said that I would, and they said, what would you do? And I said, well, you know, I paint people and I paint them in houses and stuff, so why don't I furnish the house, hire a couple of German actors, take a whole bunch of photographs of them, and then go home and create these paintings, and then the show will be putting them back in the room that the fictional action took place in. And that's what I did. And I'd never worked with actors before, so I asked friends of mine who were playwrights or filmmakers or what. I said, how do you talk to actors? You know, how do you get them going? Who are they? What is, you know? And the best advice came from a friend who said, oh, just give them problems. They love to solve problems. And I said, well, what's a problem? And they said, oh, you know, something simple like she wants $500 from him, but she won't tell him why. You'll see, just give it. And it was amazing. What, you know, you give them these problems and they just take off and create these whole dramas around it. What surprised me was how quickly I could tell when the problem I gave them didn't work. And the other thing was that sometimes I gave them problems and what they got into was so engrossing I forgot to take photographs. I just sat there like, anyway. So this was a sort of a follow-up to my most notorious painting, Bad Boy. This is sort of from another vantage point. So it turns out that trying to paint what's on TV, trying to figure out what's on TV is an incredibly difficult problem. You know, it's like, it's something where you know, it can be something that mirrors the moment. It could be something that is such a cliche mirroring of the moment. It could be something that is so arbitrary that it you know, fails to connect to the moment. It's like, what is the balance? Where are you in this thing where this TV is on and something is going on in that room, and the TV is part of that dynamic? And it took me a long time to realize in this painting it was a baseball game. I did a series of paintings, you might see some more, I can't remember if I put them in here, of multiple panels. The way I construct my narratives is I collage them. I take photographs. In the past, before Photoshop, I used to just take the snapshot, kind of put a film loop over the figure that I wanted and draw or paint it directly onto the canvas, and then go get another and another and another. and kind of create these things, wipe out what I didn't want, make adjustments. After Photoshop, I scan them into the computer, and I do the same process, but I do them in Photoshop, Collage in Photoshop. It goes much quicker, and you can do more things, etc., make more mistakes. Anyway, at one point I thought it might be interesting for people to both have the result of the process as well as some view into the process of making these paintings, making these moments. And so I did it by creating these, just taking canvases, painting on one, then going and getting another canvas, adding to the scene, et cetera, et cetera. And here's another scene from the Krefeld. Now there was the thing about actors, or these actors, is that I only chose them based on headshots. They send me their websites, but I don't read German, so all I was interested in was the kind of look. And I was looking for this guy, sort of a big, middle-aged German guy. And she attracted me because she had this very gamine look to her, and she had a kind of almost like a 20s hairstyle or something. It called that back, so I thought I could work with it. So the first day we get together, he walks in, and he's exactly what I hoped for, big guy. She walks in, she's about 5'2". He's like this big, she's like this big. And I'm thinking, oh man, how am I going to make this? This will be an interesting dynamic between them. Anyway, they turned out to both be very good actors, although my wife, April, was convinced that he was a porno actor. And he was convinced that she was convinced that he was, because he thought that every scene should end with him taking his clothes off. And I was like, okay. Anyway. This glassine work, these are from this 1980. I started working with glassine back in the late 70s. This was really what taught me how I create, because what I would do was I would take a piece of paper and I would paint something on it, in this case a bathtub. And I would pin it onto the wall, and then I would sit and ask myself questions. Okay, it's a bathroom. What else is there? And I say, well, there's probably a sink or something. I'd put a sink on there, go, pin that up. Okay, what else is there? Who's in the bathroom? And I would go, is it the mother, the father, the brother, the sister, the son, the daughter? I was working with family matrices and relationships. So I would go ahead and I would paint the mother, the father, whatever, and I'd pin it up, and it would work or it wouldn't work. I'd take it down, start again. Are they in the bathtub, out of the bathtub, walking by the bathtub? Are they turning away from somebody, turning towards somebody? All of those questions were happening, and I would paint them, and they would either work, not work, and I'd send them up. And eventually I would arrive at something that was really speaking to me, and in this case it was that. But it showed me that the way I create is associationally. I set up a problem that's relatively simple, that is to say, let's see what's going on in the bedroom today. Let's see what's going on in the bathroom or the kitchen or the, whatever, and then go from there. And there's such a deep psychological, emotional, as well as archetypal resonance with all of the spaces that we live in. You feel very differently when you're in a basement than you do when you're in a kitchen, for example. And so to sort of find places where dramas occur is very important to me. bet you wish you had some water too. This painting, I've done it for a long time intermittently, but where I paint other artists' artwork into my scenes. And you'll see if we get to it, that my most recent work, which will be in the show opening up in London, is all about art fairs, scenes that take place in art fairs. So there's a lot of other people's art in it. You know, I always have worked with relationships. You know, they're either family relationships or, you know, love relationships. They're you know, different ways that I construct the moments too, which are part of establishing a drama. There's a big difference between painting a person versus painting two people versus painting three or more, etc. There's a big difference between painting one person who is looking away from the viewer, looking at something else, as opposed to a painting of one person who's looking right at you. And I think a lot about the viewer in terms of, you know, through me. What are we looking at? Where is the position that I'm placing you, which is to say I'm placing myself. Where am I and witnessing this moment? Does where I put myself make me feel protected, vulnerable, implicated, etc.? Quite a moment. People often ask me, it's like, how do you know when your paintings are finished? And I say that for me, they're finished when I become the viewer. You know, up until that point, I'm looking at the painting as a creator, and I'm trying, as a creator, I'm sitting there going, you know, is that edge hard enough? Is that color saturated enough? Is this too tight, too loose? Blah, 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 you know. And tweaking all of that. There comes a point where I'm no longer doing that. I'm just looking at the painting the way you are, going, what's going on here, and why do I feel this way about it? And this is my other most notorious painting besides Bad Boy. And when I was living in Nova Scotia back in the 70s, I was teaching in Halifax at an art school. And this curator from Basel comes through. He's doing curating a show of Canadian artists, and he comes to my studio, and I'm working on these objects that are the shape of fish with wax scales on it and words of like sea shanties and nursery rhymes and stuff that I had made up, and I'm doing these silhouetted images of figures and houses and stuff painted directly on my studio wall. he comes in and he loves it. He loves it, and he puts me in the show of Canadians. I didn't have the heart to tell him I wasn't one, but no, it didn't matter. But anyway, so it was like a huge thing for my career. It was my first big show, to be an international show. It was enormous. And this guy was such an amazing curator and intellect and passionate man. And 2 years later, he's in New York, and I'm now in New York as well, and he calls me up and wants to come to the studio and see what I'm doing. And at the time that he comes, I'm working on this painting. And he comes in, and he's a hand wringer. He's patchy, he's smoking, and he's like, he just loves art and whatever, and he comes in and he's crushed. He's like, he cannot believe that I took the turn that I took. And he's like, it's killing him. He's pacing in my studio, and he's like, why, Eric, why are you doing it? It's so reactionary, it's so blah, blah, blah. And then he goes through. Now, let me just say that every artist has a list in their head of things they think might be wrong with their work, right? If somebody comes in and says all kinds of critical stuff, but none of it is on your list, it's okay. If they hit your list, oh man, he hit everything on my list, everything that I was afraid of, and he left, right? And I watched my career go down the drain. I was sitting there, he could no longer be supportive because I had gone in this ridiculous direction and stuff. And I'm sitting there, and I'm desperately trying to recover something from my career. I'm thinking, what can I do? I got to make this more contemporary, make it hipper, whatever. And I started to say, well, I could do this to it. No, I can't do that. That was David Sally's idea. I could do this. No, Robert Longo did that. I could do this. And I just went through everything that I thought, well, this makes it contemporary. And of course, it was everybody else's idea of what contemporary was. And in this process of doing that, I'm sitting there staring at this painting that's unfinished. And I'm thinking, I can make that elbow a little better. I think I'll do that while I think of what to do, right? And I ended up just sort of finishing the painting. And then it became one of the sort of iconic things of my oeuvre. And also, he was, nice enough that a couple of years later, he came and said, you were right, I was wrong about it. So you knew where you were going, and I didn't. And that made me feel very good. But again, this is one of those paintings contemplating, space and time, and where, the environment could be the same place at a different time, or it could be a different floor in the same condo in Miami or something like that. I'm going to, spoiler alert here, because we don't have enough time for you to sort of think of this might be true. The dogs that are painted, that woman, they're Basenjis, and Basenjis can't bark. So they're essentially mute. And I made the kids the same color as the dogs. Part of this thing is, is this her place? One of these are her kids. Is she leave, the kids are there. It could even be that she leaves and the dogs turn into those kids, whatever. But anyway. This painting was, I reached a point in my career where everybody seemed to know what my work was about. I was being labeled, and people were expecting things and stuff like that. And so I I had this photograph of a friend of mine and his daughter hugging on a beach. And it was such a sweet moment that I said, I bet if I paint this painting, people will think that something else was going on in this tender moment. But I'm going to see. So I painted it. But the one thing that I did to change the photograph was I took his bathing suit off. And then it was like, okay, so how do I assure myself and the audience that this is a sweet moment? Like, what, is it just that he's naked? Is it, whatever? And I started to, be anxious about it. And so I painted the mother in. I put her next to it. Now I'm saying, okay, see, now nothing, can happen, blah, blah, blah. I felt like I copped out. So I took the mother out. But the feeling didn't go away. So I painted the gardener in. So the gardener's over there watering the plants. I'm thinking, obviously nothing's going to happen with the gardener there. Then I felt really bad about copying out again, so I painted the gardener out. Then I was so lost in it, I painted myself sitting at the table at the back, looking out. Then I knew I was really lost, that I had no idea what was going on here. And so I painted myself out, and the last thing I did was paint that iced tea. And somehow when I painted the iced tea, the whole thing came together. Like the iced tea is this kind of weird pivotal point that connects the viewer to the scene, to the moment, makes us present in it. You don't know whether it's your tea that you put there and you're standing back watching, or whether it's his tea. But somehow that tea becomes the witness to this event. This painting is owned by the National Gallery. I don't know whether they show it, but my first big kind of how do I want to say it? I went to the beaches in southern France, and just passing through on the way to Italy or whatever, and I'm sitting on the beach, and I'm just blown away by the sensuality, the public display, the shifting boundaries, this whole thing to sort of a puritanical American sensibility. I'm sitting there with my mouth open going, I can't believe it. And one of the things, I started taking lots of photographs while I was there, and those photographs, which I used either to create scenes on a beach or to create scenes in bedrooms or bathrooms or whatever, became my laboratory. Now the thing about the beach, the southern French beach, was that you had body language that was both sensual and intimate, but also it was social. And so you would be able to take somebody who was sitting there talking to somebody and very easily put a phone in their hand and put them in a kitchen, and it would be the same sort of thing, body language-wise, be the same thing. And so I use them a lot. The other thing was that it was the beginning of my using the camera. And I wasn't really aware of it for a long time afterwards, but how the camera was teaching me about how to capture an authentic feeling to a narrative moment. the camera slices life so thinly that everybody is off balance. Everybody is in a state of motion. And it's precisely that slightly shifting body, that slightly, twisting, moving, bending, nodding, reaching, whatever, that creates and animates a moment. And for me, it was something where I would say, is this person, are they turning away from me? Are they turning towards me? Are they turning because a fly just landed on their shoulder? Are they turning because somebody just said something painful to them, or they had a painful memory? And it would go from that, but it all started with the way the camera captured the body in the slightest motion that it really informed me. I stole the water from Homer. This is, I have done over a period of recent years a series of sort of group portraits of friends. And this is the first one that I did from that. These are, my wife is in the polka dot bathing suit, and then they're different artists, part of our crowd. It was there's a tradition on Long Island and New York. There's a tradition of these. Actually, there's a tradition in the art world of artists getting together and being photographed. And there's the famous photograph of the Abex painters being photographed, or there's a great one of all these Hamptons artists, Larry Rivers and Frank O'Hara and people like that, photographed out in the Hamptons and stuff. So for me, this was a kind of adding to that history. And when I stepped back from the painting, I realized that this is the first painting that everybody's smiling in. Except for my friend Robbie, who's a psychotherapist. Anyway. I've tried different ways to establish narrative moments and things like that. This one, at one point, I decided that I would distort. I would sort of make the foreground smaller, the background bigger. I did a series of paintings that sort of flipped space around as a way of kind of establishing a different reading. This one's the most successful of the ones that I did like that. We were talking today at lunch about Edward Hopper's painting of the people sitting there looking off, everybody looking in the same direction. That's up in the gallery now. And, sort of speculating on what they might be looking at. Betsy was talking about the people witnessing the atomic bomb explosions and stuff like that, maybe being a part of it. Anyway, in this painting, there's people are all moving in the same direction towards the light. And, you're never going to know what it is that's drawing them. For all you know, it could be an alien spaceship that's sucking them over there. But somehow there's this like, a tacit agreement that we all have to go there, and into this light, into this thing that we don't know, and they're all dutifully doing that. Hopefully, it's a good thing. This is a painting where the initial sort of kind of chaotic grouping moment is one that doesn't necessarily imply something bad, but the longer you look at it, the more you see that there are people in there that are quite distressed and that something maybe bad has happened. And this painting's up at the Hirshhorn. I don't know whether it's up, but it's owned by the Hirshhorn. And this was based on photographs taken at my mother's funeral, sort of reconstructed. It's a portrait of the McEnroe family. This is the painting that's upstairs in the gallery here. Hopefully, if you haven't seen it, you'll get a chance to go up and look at it more closely. The thing about, painting families is interesting. They can't help but reveal a lot to you about their dynamics and stuff anyway. But it was interesting in this case, painting them. I was at Francesco's studio. We'd set up a thing of, I'm going to do a portrait of your family. And so they were all coming, came to this thing. The boys in the back, the twins, they were at that age where they were like, they so didn't want to be there. And they just lurked in the background, didn't say anything, and they just sort of hovered and around. One of the daughters arrived an hour late. There was some tension between the two, the other sister, whatever was going on. I put this painting together. There wasn't one single photograph that had any of this grouping in it. It was all like a single thing here, maybe two people here, whatever. It's like I couldn't actually get them into the same space at the same time. And so I accepted that as part of the description of the family, the dynamic of the family, and I tried to emphasize it through making the painting feel like an overt collage, that there's an irrationality to both the perspective on it, that sort of horizontal line, that tipping plane in the background that feels like people should be sliding off of this thing. On the left side it's in focus, and as you move to the other side, it's a blur. And so it sort of sets up a different kind of speed of reading and activity for me. The girls sitting on the bench are sitting on a bench that's impossibly tilting into the plane and sort of whatnot, and the whole thing is also tilting up. So you're getting this kind of disequilibrium as you're looking at this family, trying to keep them together. The most sort of grounded, and comfortable in those spaces are the two parents, Francesco and Alba, in that they're very solidly there, and even though separated. And for me, she's such a matriarch, such a powerful matriarch, that she is kind of, she sets up the protection or the whatever between the kids and the dad, and so. When I do portraits of people or families or friends, I never tell anybody what to do. What to wear, where to want to shoot it, etc. They sort of choose their things for them. And in this case, this is a friend and a collector who happens to have this Jason Rhodes neon piece, and they wanted to be sort of photographed inside this insane environment. My father one year rented a condo in southern France at the same time that April and I were there. And so we went to visit him and my stepmother. And he's all excited because the condo next to him is a nudist condo. And he has a pass, because the guy who rents it has a space in both places, so he could go in. So he was waiting for me for weeks to go over there with him. So we went over and kind of looked around, and it was hysterical. Absolutely. So you didn't have to get naked to sort of go and pretend you're thinking about renting or buying a condo. But we go in and we're like, we decide to get a cup of coffee, and we're sitting at this little cafe table, and the waitress comes up, and you look up, and she's like got a hairnet and a little apron. Okay, all right, Anyway, the weirdest thing about it was that when we left, and it was a gated community, so we go out of the gate, and about 100 feet down the road, parked on the side of the road, was this guy, who had taken his clothes off. And, I don't know whether he's going to like sneak into the nudist thing or something like that, but he was like standing there, and he saw me sort of lift my camera up as we were driving by, and so he covered himself with his newspaper, which I thought was pretty amusing. Anyway, so I created this painting around that. I went to Rome as an artist in residence at the American Academy a month after my father died. So I went to Rome in a grieving state. And I have to say that if you have to mourn, go to Rome. It's like it's a place that is in no rush to forget anything. And it lives with this constant, like, eruption of the past. Every time they scrape a stone off a street, some part of their past comes up. And it's like it's so multi-layered, and it's so full of memory. And as well as, like, this sort of really palpable belief in a higher form of life. And stuff that I found it incredibly soothing over the 2 months that I was there. I'm not a religious person, so it's not about religion, but going into places that are clearly spiritual, that are where the art and the reason for that art, the narratives and the icons and stuff are all still intact, where you have this this whole sort of environment that's of a piece rather than the fragmentation that's so much a part of our lives now, was very powerful. I was asked by a dealer, my dealer from Germany at one point. He said he had gone to a bullfight, and he found himself wondering how I would paint a bullfight. So when he said that to me, I said, well, I have no idea. I've never been to a bullfight. So he took me to one. And I took a bunch of photographs. I ended up doing a whole series of bullfight paintings. I found it to be so powerful and complicated and confusing and, brutal and beautiful and shocking and, all kinds of things went through. Ultimately, if you send a person who grew up on Ferdinand the Bull, their tendency is to take the bull's point of view, but this is Joan, Didion, and John Gregory Dunn. And she was a writer. She's a writer who was a huge influence on me, as a young adult and, trying to figure things out. And so I was so thrilled to do this portrait of them. And when I finished it, I invited them back, and they were really pleased with it or whatever. And I remember John saying, "Oh God, you really captured me. You really got that Irish robust chest," and da da da. He's going on and on. And a month later, he died from a heart attack. So it was like, oh God. So I had done a self-portrait. I painted a group of friends behind. First of all, I started painting a group of friends and including myself in the painting. And then I decided at one point to take myself out of the painting and put myself in front of the painting and focus more on me as a self-portrait than on the painting behind. The painting's called, Self-Portrait as an Unfinished Work. And so the characters in the painting are in different stages of development and whatnot. Anyway, so at the opening, Chuck Close comes up to me, and he's all excited about this painting. He loves it, and he says, "You got to do a portrait of me in front of one of my paintings." And I said, "Oh, I'd love to. That'd be great." And so we set it up, and I went, and he and his girlfriend, I think now his wife, Sienna, were there in his studio. And of course, they're like wearing these outfits that are like so full of pattern and stuff. And then he sits down in front of his painting. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I'm screwed. This is like totally mean, you know? Anyway, so I start the painting, and I don't work from grids or thing. I've never painted from a grid, so, and of course Chuck, that's what he paints from, are grids. So, you know, I think, you know, I'll just eyeball it, you know? Sort of get a, you know, feel of it, and and I kind of mark this off, and then I start to paint, and I've got so many extra squares. I'm thinking, how am I going to, like, get this whole eye when there's, like, all these blank spots that are happening, and, you know, et cetera. So I was like, I got so lost in it and really tried to come up with ways to fudge the inaccuracy of it. And then there was that damn thing he was wearing. What a character. So this will be the last work that I'll show. This is my most recent work, and as I said, this is all based on scenes from art fairs. And it was because of the writing of my memoir, Bad Boy, that I took this subject on, because I wanted to stop my narrative, my memoir narrative, in like 1990, before the art world really had become this other thing, become this art market in such a full-blown way. And so I wanted to just ignore it. And the publisher said, you got to bring it up to date. And so it forced me in writing the book to confront a lot of the stuff that I had been denying or you know, ignoring. And one of the things that it did was made me realize that, you know, love it, hate it, you know, whatever, I'm actually very much a part of it. And although I'm not the largest cog in that wheel, I'm definitely something that moves it along as well as everybody else. And there's a complicity. I mean, I had no idea that, you know, in the late 70s, early 80s, when we were all sort of doing this, coming into our being, that this was what we were opening the door to. It didn't feel that way back in the 80s. All of my peers and myself included really believed that art had the power to change things, to change the world. And so, you know, that we had different strategies for what that meant, whether it was to subvert art itself, to create a construct of meaninglessness as a way of bringing down a value structure that could then be reestablished, or whether it was about trying to find some other kind of meaningfulness through the object that sort of stripped, you know, the other ambitions away from it or whatnot. I don't know, but we really believed that there was this other reason for making art, and at the same time, we were the generation that, you know, people were starting to pay lots of money for at a very young age, and we were getting privileges that we didn't have. There was so much art that was happening from so many different ways that, you know, the pluralistic movement just spread out like a wildfire into so many directions that structurally, institutionally, the art world couldn't handle it. It couldn't change fast enough to accommodate what was going on. And reviews, which were thoughtful and long, and things, either magazines, long extended meditations on art, were all of a sudden shrunk to daily newspapers that were blurbs that were just sort of saying, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. And our pictures were ending up on the same pages as rock stars and film stars and stuff like that. So all of a sudden there was glamour attached to being an artist. And, you know, all of these things at the time we were thinking were innocuous. And some, we had a handle on it. We were treating it as a game. It's like, yeah, why not go eat at a restaurant that's $1,000 a head? You know, why not? You know, cool, huh? That doesn't have anything to do with who we are and what art is, etc. You know, let's you know, fly in classy places and blah blah blah. And then all of a sudden it was like, no, that's what. Not only was that something we were a part of, but it was something a younger generation wanted to be a part of, and started to make art that reflected that ambition and that, you know, to be a part of this other kind of thing that had nothing to do with where we came from. So somehow it all led to this. The thing is that this genre, this is a genre that goes back to the Dutch 1600s, 1640s and stuff. And there's certainly been a history of, you know, artists painting other artists and other artists' work. This slide's a little too big for the projector, so we cut off her head. Sorry. Anyway, so it sits within a tradition on one hand, and at the same time, it's something that's very specific to this moment. That, to me, what I like is the you know, every artist is projecting outward. The thing that they do is projects outward, because what they're looking for is attention. They're looking for it to grab your attention, to make a connection and something. The artists project out different distances. You know, the difference between an Edward Hopper, which you walk into a gallery, you'll see his painting first. The last painting you'll see will be a Morandi. But both of them are still projecting out the distance they're most comfortable with, and in terms of trying to grab you and pull you into their moment, their world, and stuff. So you have this. Now in an art fair, you have it, you know, just 1,000-fold. It's this insane space where everybody, thousands of artists, everybody clamoring for attention. You have this really sort of slightly irrational, definitely surreal space where it's temporary architecture that opens and closes onto other spaces that are showing a whole different kind of work that is demanding a whole different kind of attention, etc. So there's this feeling of collapsing and reconstructing that's going on all the time. And then you have people who are there essentially not to look at the art, but to either be seen as well, or they're looking to buy something. You know, they're consumers, and so they're doing that, and their focus is not really on, you know, the experience of the work that surrounds it, but more on the identification of it. You know, the finger pointing or whatever, recognition. It's like speed dating. And it turns out to be a very fertile ground for making lots of pictures. The other thing, an unintended thing for me, was that in painting so many works of other artists, my palette changed because I'm now in their color realm. And so it opened up a lot of things for me. And we're going to end on a few slides of sculpture. How am I doing, Nona? Am I okay? Time-wise, Nona? She's not there. She fell asleep. It's 8 to, so in a minute, I'm going to hurry through this. But anyway, this is an installation at Rockefeller Center of the sculpture Tumbling Woman. I did this in response to 9/11. It was unveiled, the first anniversary. A firestorm erupted around it, and it was covered up and removed within 2 days. And it taught me a lot about a lot of different things. The experience of 9/11, the trauma and tragedy of 9/11 was amplified by the fact that there were no bodies. You had 3,000 people who die and no bodies. So the mourning process turned to the language of architecture. And very quickly, everybody's sort of solution to how to grieve was surrounded by this thing of, do you shoot up lights that look and imitate the ghost of the buildings? Do you, do the footprints of the buildings have to be preserved as sacred ground, et cetera, et cetera. Building will build taller, higher, whatever. It was about that, and in the process, what got lost was that 3,000 human beings had died and disappeared tragically in this nightmare. So it felt important to me to reassert the body, to reassert the human aspect of this as part of our mourning process. And by the time that I was working on this, the country had fragmented and was just spiraling into just such craziness, such anger and fear and stuff like that, that it felt to me like we were sort of tumbling like a sagebrush, tumbling out of control and just rolling along and maybe sticking on something for a moment and then tumbling again as the wind of terror carried us further. And so this image of tumbling was very much a part of wanting to, sort of enter the dialogue and the process. And I know you're not. There's a second version of this, a smaller version. This is pretty monumental. There's a smaller life-size version upstairs in the gallery that I did years later. But one of the things that I did in terms of the pose of it was I extended her arm. And I extended it in the hope that people would see the sculpture and would at some point grab her arm and hold it. One, to connect to the tragedy, connect to the loss, and also to help sort of slow the tumbling down. And I know you're not allowed to touch art in museums, but if you secretly would go up and touch, I would greatly appreciate. I'm sorry, Betsy, that I... Don't tell anyone I said to do that. These are earlier works of sculptures of mine. But in some way, I did a lot of sculptures of women bending, crouching, covering themselves. It was like all done in the 90s and whatnot, but somehow, on some level, prepared me for the 9/11. So. This was a sculpture I did commissioned by the U.S. Tennis, USTA, for the inauguration of the Arthur Ashe commemorative plaza at Flushing Meadows. And I was asked to submit a proposal, and I submitted this proposal. I was blown away that they accepted it. I mean, naked athletes in American sports venues. I know they're common. Anyway, this is the largest sculpture I did. It's like 14 feet high. And this is an exhibition, 10 Breaths, which is it has, you can see in the background, the Tumbling Woman 2 is in that far room. It's a series of vignettes of disaster, tragedy, and it's called 10 Breaths because I woke up in the middle of the night saying that. I'd been sort of thinking about shadows and about the shadow world and trying to deal with the shadows that seem to be consuming our experience recently, and so the Latin word for shadow is tenebrae, and somehow I must have gone to sleep thinking tenebrae and woke up 10 breaths. But it felt right, that thing of, you say 10 breaths means that the next will be 9 breaths, 8 breaths. It's a countdown in a way. The other is that it's about inspiration and expiration, and it's that sort of breathing as a way of trying to stabilize yourself and stuff. So all of those were intended as part of the associations for it. I think that's the last slide, so yeah. That's it.